This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture. And welcome to a very special Christmas episode of the City of God podcast, where we are weekly talking about today's biggest cultural issues, all through the lens of God's infallible word. My name is Rabe, Pacienza, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, John Rabe. Great to see you today, John.
Great to see you, Rob. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
We have a fun program today. Now, those who are listening won't know this, but those who are watching us on video will know I am dressed pretty regularly today, but you, on the other hand, are in the Christmas spirit.
'Tis the season. You can only pull out this jacket once a month, so decided today was a good day to do it.
Yeah,
And today for our Christmas episode, we are joined by an individual who is a longtime friend of our ministry,
Yes.
and that is Bill Federer. He is an author, speaker, historian, been featured many times on our television program, and the author of many books, but including one in particular that we're going to talk about today. There Really Is a Santa Claus. Bill, so glad to have you back on the City of God.
Well, Rob and John, great to be with you.
So, Bill, let's get into this book in particular, There Really Is a Santa Claus, and really the story of St. Nicholas. Tell us a little bit about this real figure in history.
So St. Nicholas is to the Greek Orthodox what St. Peter is to Roman Catholics. I mean, he is the most popular Greek Orthodox saint. More Greek Orthodox churches named after Nicholas. Nick is a common Greek name. And
Nicholas of Myra.
Correct. Yeah. And so he lived during Roman times. So first 3 centuries of Christianity, there's 10 major persecutions. Christians were thrown to the lions. And so around 280 AD is when he's born, and a movement was sweeping through Christianity at this time called monasticism. It was this where you had a personal experience with Jesus. You would more or less, it was their version of separation of church and state. You'd withdraw from the world and just enjoy your personal relationship with the Lord. And so they would follow the advice or the recommendation that Jesus gave to the rich young ruler. One thing you lack, sell all, give to the poor, and come and follow me. So when this monasticism movement was starting, you would have Christians selling, giving away everything to the poor, and then joining monasteries. And then you'd never hear from him again. So he didn't want to get the credit for giving away his money. So he would go into town. The town was Patara, Asia Minor. Today that's Turkey. And he would throw money in the window of poor people. And because at nighttime, then nobody would know who gave it. Sometimes, reportedly, the money landed in a shoe or a stocking that's drying by the fireplace. One story that became very popular, and it's in a lot of church artwork, and it's St. Nicholas on his tippy toes throwing money in the window, and then there's 3 girls and a father. So this story is there was a merchant who had gone bankrupt, and the creditors were coming over and going to take not only his house, but his children, his daughters. And he knew if they were taken, it would be a terrible life, maybe even sex trafficking. So the father had an idea. If he could hurry up and marry the daughters off, the creditors couldn't take them. Unfortunately, he did not have money for a dowry, which was needed in that area of the world for a legally recognized wedding. Nicholas hears the problem late one night, throws money in the window. The oldest daughter has a dowry, gets married, big buzz, talk of the town, throws it in for the second daughter. Third time, the dad's expecting it. When he throws the money in, the dad runs outside and catches Nicholas. And Nicholas makes the father promise not to tell where the money came from. And that's the origin of the tradition of secret gift giving on the anniversary of Nicholas's death, which was December 6th, 343 AD.
That's amazing.
Now, once he gave away all the money, sure enough, he was going to join a monastery. Went over to Zion, which is outside of Jerusalem, a monastery, and he reportedly went to Bethlehem, where the Church of the Nativity is. So you could have the picture of Jesus kneeling at the manger, right? There's a little bit of a truth that. Well, he's about to take his vows, and you'll never hear from him again. But the Lord somehow tells him not to hide his light under a bushel. And he's supposed to make a cultural impact, so to speak. So he decides to go back to Myra, which is a coastal city there in Asia Minor, today Turkey. And unbeknownst to him, the bishop had died, and the church leaders could not decide who the next bishop was going to be. And one of them has a dream that the first person to church the next day would be named Nicholas, and he was to be their next bishop. Well, he's the first one in. They break the news, and he's not too thrilled, because the Roman Emperor Diocletian was arresting bishops and killing them. So it was sort of like, you be the bishop. No, you first. No, I insist. You be the
bishop. Yeah.
And so he finally agrees. He's arrested. He's put in jail. And then the unthinkable, the Roman Emperor Diocletian is struck with an intestinal disease and abdicates the throne on May 1st, 305 AD. By this time, the Roman emperors had been declaring themselves a god with a little g, sprinkling gold dust in their hair and demanding their image be worshipped. So this was sort of like a god resigning. I just think that's sort of funny. The next emperor is Galerius. He continues the persecution. He's struck with an intestinal disease and dies in 311 AD. Now there's no emperor. And the four most powerful generals decide to fight it out. Two are defeated, and it comes down to Constantine and Maxentius. Constantine is stationed in York, England. His men surround him, say, "Hail Caesar," so he's marching toward Rome. In Rome is Maxentius. It's the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, 312 AD. And the story is that the day before the battle, Constantine saw the sign of Christ in the sky, which was the first two Greek letters for the name of Christ. Greeks would abbreviate names with two letters, like we abbreviate, California, CA. And the first letter of the Greek name Christ is the X. It makes the K sound, and it's called the Chi. And the letter that makes the sound is called Rho, and it's written as a big P. So it's X or P. It's called the Chi Rho. Over the years, it got shortened just to the Chi, the X, and it was called the Christ's Cross or crisscross. And that's where you get Xmas. So X is not crossing out Christ. It's the Greek letter that stood for Christ.
Yep.
It became an oath where you'd swear to tell the truth, cross my heart, or you'd sign at the X, or then they would kiss it to show sincerity. So it's the X is the O on the bottom of Valentine. Anyway, so Nicholas is let out of jail, and he now preaches against paganism. And nearby is the temple to Diana. It was in Ephesus. The Apostle Paul preached against Diana worship there, Acts 19. Twice as big as the Parthenon in Athens. 127 huge pillars and temple prostitutes. It was the Las Vegas of the Mediterranean. He preaches against it. They eventually tear it down. Next is he preaches against exposure of unwanted infants. Roman practice was to mother bear a child, lay it at the father's feet. If he picked it up, they would keep it. If not, if he thought it wasn't healthy, the mother would have to put the baby in a basket and let it die of exposure out in the woods somewhere. And as Christianity spread, the Roman women would put their babies in a basket at the door of a Christian family and knock on the door. That's where you get these stories. Oh, knock on the door, is a baby. Who leaves a baby? Right. The Roman women did. And so Nicholas would have been a pro-life preacher. And then he preached against sexual immorality, like the Olympics. They ran them naked, right? The word gym, G-Y-M, is the Greek word for naked. Won't get into all that, but he preached against it. So he would have been a fire and brimstone type. He would have been against all this wokeness in churches today where anything sexual goes, And then he confronted corrupt politicians. So there was a governor who was going to execute some soldiers. We're familiar with politicians that have body count lists associated with their names, right? And so this governor was going to kill some guys to cover up his corruption. Nicholas finds out about it, goes down to the square, breaks through the crowd, grabs the sword out of the executioner's hand, and then by knowledge given him by the Holy Spirit, he tells everybody what this corrupt governor was doing. And the governor realizes only God could know the details, and he repents. And then there's the Arian heresy. So first heresy ever, since Constantine legalized Christianity. Now a bishop named Arius said Jesus was a little less than God, a created being, writes a catchy song. The Visigoths convert to Arianism, and it's splitting the church, but it's splitting the Roman Empire. So Constantine says, settle this thing. He gets all the bishops for the first time ever to show up at one spot. It's called Nicaea, not far from Myra. And they settle it, write the Nicene Creed. And tradition is that Nicholas slapped Arius for starting the Arian heresy. So jolly old St. Nick had a little temper. Better watch out if he's coming to town. And then the Greeks have lots of miracles ascribed to him. But he dies on December 6, 343 AD.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And so much history there just surrounding one person. And, the Da Vinci Code, maybe 20 years ago, made a lot out of the Council of Nicaea, made it seem as though, well, there were some doubts about the divinity of Christ. The actual vote, I think, ended up being like 318-3 or something like that. There was no, as Darrell Bach says, we were not up late counting the Chads at the Council of Nicaea to see whether Jesus was divine or not. But when you're talking about someone like St. Nicholas, who eventually St. Nicholas evolves into Santa Claus, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But from a historical perspective, what are the difficulties with sort of rooting out legend from fact? Because you do have somebody who did some amazing things, and around people like that, always a certain amount of legend accrues as well.
Right. So the first 3 centuries, with Roman emperors wanting to wipe out Christianity, they would burn scriptures. They would burn books. They would smash records. It's sort of like, when you hear like some of these countries where Islamists are coming in and they're destroying stuff. So a lot of the records we have or have been destroyed. So we don't know a lot. So a lot of it does rest on legend.
Interesting.
Yeah. I so appreciate what you just said about, as you were explaining, a fascinating history regarding St. Nicholas.
Yeah.
Even the symbol of Christ, the chi, which looks like an X. So many people say, as you mentioned, oh, that's just people taking Christ out of Christmas.
Yeah.
So when we see what looks like Xmas, it's really just this universal symbol for Christ, which is the chi, which is amazing. Bill, there's so many Christmas traditions that we celebrate. So many traditions we don't even understand where they came from. So many traditions that most might think are secular traditions, but really they came out of the Christian tradition. What might be some of those traditions we celebrate today in the 21st century that are really rooted in the story of Jesus Christ?
Well, the nativity scene. So Nicholas dies. The Emperor Justinian, who builds the Hagia Sophia, that huge church. He builds a church in Myra, names it for Nicholas. And then 988 AD, Vladimir the Great, the Emperor of Russia, converts to Greek Orthodox Christianity and adopts Nicholas as the patron saint of Russia. But then Islam comes in. And all 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation are wiped out. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea, gone. And they're concerned that they're going to destroy the grave of St. Nicholas. Now, people forget, 846 AD, 11,000 Saracen Muslim pirates sack Rome. And they sack the Basilica of St. Peter's and the bones of St. Peter and the bones of St. Paul. And so Pope Leo IV builds a 39-foot wall around the Basilica of St. Peter. It's still there to this day. And so the Christians move the grave, the remains of St. Nicholas, to Italy. The year is 1087. They build a cathedral, Cattedrale Niccolò de Bari, Cathedral of Nicholas of Bari. And Pope Urban II dedicates it. Now, you know Pope Urban II because he's the one that goes to the Council of Clermont in 1095 and begs the European kings to send help to the Greeks. It's called the First Crusade.
Yeah.
And anyway, so St. Francis of Assisi, sort of in protest, decides to create the creche scene, the nativity scene, saying we need to get back to the real reason for the season. Jesus, the Son of God, was born in a manger. So whenever you see the nativity scene, that's St. Francis of Assisi, 1223 AD. Then the Kris Kringle. So Martin Luther starts the Reformation, 1517. And by this time, there's a saint's day for every day of the year. Churches are filled with relics, little pieces of bone or hair of some saint. They have side altars to the different saints. And Martin Luther considers this a distraction from Christ. So he ends all the saints' days in Protestant countries. But the Germans like the St. Nicholas Day with the gift giving. So Martin Luther decides to move all the gift giving to December 25th and said all gifts come from the Christ child.
Wow.
And the German pronunciation of Christ child is Kris Kringle.
Kris Kringle.
Yeah.
Right, there you go.
Yeah, interesting.
So kindergarten,
Wow.
kindercare, means child, Kris means Christ. So Kris Kringle got pronounced Kris Kringle. And then there's the Christmas tree. if you want, I can give a little of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because just to interject here, there is, and especially with new Christians, and I went through this phase, Rob, I don't know if you did, but where you get this idea, you start hearing, well, all this Christmas stuff is pagan, and I'm a new Christian, I want to do the right thing, and along with throwing out, the old rock records or whatever, it's like we're gonna get rid of this Christmas stuff, and then it turns out, well, and I encourage younger Christians now, don't be so hasty. This is all far more Christian than you think. The world has told us this is all pagan, but it's really not, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about, the tree, the time of year that they always say, well, it's just supposed to be the solstice. It's just a pagan festival. These are not just pagan festivals.
Right. So there's some holidays you cannot redeem, like Halloween. It's pagan to the core. But there's some stuff we can redeem. So we're all familiar with St. Patrick evangelizing Ireland, and he used the 3-leaf clover to teach the Trinity. Well, Patrick was from Britain, right? And he went over there around the year 400 AD. Well, around 700 AD, you got another guy from Britain named Boniface, also called Winfrid. And he goes through the woods in Europe to Germany. So where do the Germans come from? China builds the Great Wall of China beginning around the 2nd century AD, and the Huns can no longer attack into China, so they turn west and attack tribe after tribe that turns into a domino effect of displaced tribes that spill over the Roman border. The Franks, the Germans, the Anglos, the Saxons, the Jutes, the Alemanni, the Lombards. Well, the Germans worshipped Thor, and that's where you get Thor's Day. Or Thursday. And then the Germans worship Woden, and that's where you get Woden's Day or Wednesday. Now, the Quakers refused to say the names of those days because they were pagan. So they would say Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, 4th day, and 5th day, Friday, and Saturday. But anyway, Thor lived in a big oak tree in Geismar, Germany, and they would do sacrifice to him, maybe animal, maybe human. And so St. Boniface goes through the woods and takes an axe, and he starts chopping down Thor's tree. And then supposedly a big wind came along and helped him out and knocked the tree over. And then he points to a little evergreen tree and says, let no blood be shed tonight. Let this little evergreen tree be called the tree of the Christ child. See how it points toward heaven. Its leaves are evergreen, symbolizing everlasting life. Your houses are built of cedar. Matter of fact, Solomon's temple is bordered with cedar. Cedar's a Lebanon. And so they call it the Christ child tree. The Kris Kringle bomb, and even the lullaby by forgot the name, but the famous composer that wrote the most recognizable lullaby. Brahms. There you go. Brahms lullaby. If in German the words are, go to sleep, good night, or whatever, but it says, and have dreams of the Kris Kringle's bomb. So the Christmas tree was symbolic. The evergreen tree was symbolic of Germans converting to Christianity. Even in Christianity today, it talked about how the shape of the tree as a triangle was used to teach the Trinity, very similar to St. Patrick using the 3-leaf clover to teach the Trinity to these pagan Druid Irish. And but Martin Luther is coming home one night, sees the stars twinkling, puts candles in the branches, tells his children this is like the sky above Bethlehem on the night of Christ's birth. And so that's Martin Luther's, the Kris Kringle, right? And then the tree but then you got England. And if you want, I can share a little of that.
Sure.
So Henry VIII brings the Reformation to England, but not because he wanted to refocus on the Christ child. He just wanted another wife. Ended up having 6 of them. And Christmas during Henry VIII's time was a party time. It was drinking, carousing, Windsor Castle. They had parties. He would fling sugar plums at people. They would have acrobats and court jesters and boy bishops, right? So a kid dressed up as a bishop, and they would mock him. They would have cross-dressing. They would have bear baiting, where they'd put bears in a pit, sort of like dog fighting, right? And it was chasing women. It was carousing. It was wassailing, where they'd drink some spiced ale and throw the rest of it on some plant. And it was like a Mardi Gras. People, they even had a Lord of Misrule, just like Mardi Gras. Wow. And Mardi Gras used to be a religious day. It was the day before Lent, when you would fast 40 days before Easter. And now it's a lewd party in New Orleans. That's sort of what happened with Henry VIII in England and Christmas. So when the Puritans come along, they outlaw Christmas.
Yeah.
They tear down Shakespeare's Globe Theater because of he had a Twelfth Night carnivalesque type of body play, and the Puritans said, Cotton Mather, can God be honored with mad mirth and hard drinking and lewd gaming, fit for a Bacchus or a night of Mohammedan Ramadan? You cannot possibly think that our Holy Savior is honored by this. And so the Puritans took over England and in 1647 outlawed Christmas. And then the Puritans settled New England, and they passed a law in 1659 outlawing Christmas. They gave a 5-shilling fine for anybody caught celebrating Christmas. So where the Pilgrims and Puritans did not celebrate Christmas, others did. And notably the Germans, the French, but especially the Dutch. And so most of our traditions regarding St. Nicholas come from the Dutch. Now, St. Nicholas is the patron saint of Amsterdam. And he's also the patron saint of sailors, right? Because he is one of the miracles. Supposedly, he calmed the sea so the fishermen can get back. And so the Dutch had an empire that went from Jakarta all the way to New Amsterdam, and so they would have a Saint Nicholas on the prow of their boat instead of a mermaid or something. So the Dutch settled New Amsterdam, and the first church they found is the St. Nicholas Dutch Reformed Church, right, 1642 in Battery Park, New York. Now, the Dutch do a take on the book of Revelation, which is quite fascinating. So we're all familiar with the Catholic saying, St. Peter's at the gates of heaven, right? I mean, that's anyway, the Dutch say that Jesus will return at the end of the world to judge the living and the dead, riding a white horse. And the saints will come back with him, riding white horses. Jude 1:14, and I saw the Lord coming with thousands of his saints to execute judgment.
Right.
The book of Revelation chapter 20, that the Lord will return with his armies on white horses. And so the thought is that St. Nicholas is a saint, so he will be one of those riding back with Jesus to do judgment. But he's so special to the Dutch, they have him coming back once a year for a little mini judgment day. A little checkup on the kids, make sure they're on the right track. And so in Holland, he's coming back riding a white horse, dressed as a saint, as a bishop, to do what? Judgment. And so Daniel, as well as the book of Revelation, says, I saw the Ancient of Days, and before him were thousands upon 10,000s, and the books were opened, and the judgment was set. And so what does St. Nicholas bring with him? The books. Right? The book of the naughty and the nice. And over the years, the angels turn into the elves. Saints come from heaven. That turns into the North Pole. In Norway, they had few horses. He's riding a reindeer, pulls into him, pulling a sled. And so you can see where it gets off track, right? Now, the Dutch settled. Now, they added one other feature that I probably would have loved to have tormented my little brothers with this one. Santa had a helper, Zwarte Piet, Black Peter. He's a Moor. A Muslim. And the Muslims enslaved Europeans. They controlled Spain for 700 years, and over 1 million Europeans were sold into Islamic slavery. There were whole Catholic orders called the Trinitarians who would collect donations at church services to ransom back your Christian friend. Sort of like I was on Eric Metaxas' podcast, and he talked about he's raising money for Christian Solidarity International to rescue Christians out of slavery in Sudan.
Yeah.
It's still happening. Well, they would tell the little Dutch boys, if you're good, St. Nicholas will give you a present. If you're naughty, Zwarte Piet will put you in a gunny sack, take you back to Spain, and sell you into Muslim slavery.
Yikes.
Amazing.
So often when you tell little kids that Santa's coming, they start crying.
Right.
I did a call-in, and a guy says, yeah, I was raised in an area of Holland, and all the little boys in our neighborhood would go to sleep the night before St. Nicholas' visit with a pocket knife in their pocket. I go, why is that? He goes, that's to cut ourselves out of the gunny sack in case Zwarte Piet took it. Right. And anyway, the Dutch settled New Amsterdam. They started St. Nicholas Dutch Reformed Church. He's the patron saint of New Amsterdam. Yep. Right. And in New York, you have Washington Irving. He wrote Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Rip Van Winkle coined the name Gotham for New York City. And he's considered the father of the American literature, and he helps found the St. Nicholas Society in New York, right, preserving the culture. And well, he writes Dietrich Knickerbocker's History of New York from the beginning to the end of the Dutch dynasty. Knickerbocker is a made-up name. It actually means baggy pants, right? And so he writes this in 1809. And he tells, there's a book that's no longer in print, but it tells these old stories of when St. Nicholas would visit, and he'd riding his wagon over the treetops, throw out presents to his favorites. But he describes him not dressed as a bishop, but in a typical Dutch outfit of these long trunk hose, trousers, leather boots, belt, stocking hat, and a pipe. But he still calls him St. Nicholas. Then in New York, Clement Moore, 1823, he's a Hebrew professor at the Episcopal Seminary, and his family donated land. There's a park in New York called the Clement Moore Park. He writes a poem for his children, and we all know it. 'Twas night before Christmas, all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Their stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon be there. Yep. He's still called St. Nicholas, but now he's shrunk. So he's not only not dressed as a bishop, he's now shrunk. To two more installments, Civil War. Thomas Nast is an illustrator for Harper's Weekly magazine, and he is the one who gave us the Republican elephant and Democrat mule in his political cartoons. He does a front page of St. Nicholas talking to the Union troops with the North Pole sign in the back. I actually did an interview with Bill O'Reilly, and he goes, I have a original copy of that framed in my office. But it was a political jab at the South to hint that St. Nicholas belongs to the North. Yeah. Now, Coca-Cola. They hire an artist named Haddon Sundblom. You know him because he invented the Quaker Oats Man and Aunt Jemima syrup. Well, he does a picture of St. Nicholas drinking Coke every year for 33 years. Coca-Cola pioneered mass marketing, so that's the image spread around the world.
That's our modern Santa Claus.
Yep. Modern. So he's full grown again, huggable grandfather, rosy cheeks. But if you peel back the layers, there really was a Christian named Nicholas who loved Jesus, went into the ministry, was imprisoned for his Christian faith. He preached against Arianism and stood up for the Trinity. He confronted corrupt politicians. And most of all, he was generous and gave to the poor because he wanted the glory to go to God and not to him.
I love that. Bill, this has been a fascinating conversation. And as I'm sitting here speaking to you and listening to just you go through history, it's just a reminder to me why more and more Christians need to know the true story of the history of the world. Yeah. In the midst of a secular culture, the commercialization of Christmas in particular, just to hear the Christian roots of this holiday, this celebration that we know the true meaning of Christmas is the story of Jesus Christ and the incarnation of God 2,000 years ago, but even some of the traditions that we celebrate today having Christian roots, it gives us a whole new perspective on the Christmas tree, the nativity, even the image of Santa Claus finding its roots in the story of St. Nicholas. If you do not have the book, I highly recommend Bill Federer's book, There Really Is a Santa Claus. Bill, thank you so much for being on the show today, and have a very Merry Christmas.
Well, thank you, Rob, John, and Merry Christmas to all the viewers and listeners.
I can't imagine a better Christmas podcast than this. This is fantastic. Thank you, Bill.
Absolutely. And that's all the time we have today for the City of God podcast, this special Christmas episode with Bill Federer talking about the Christian roots of not only this holiday, but all of the traditions that we celebrate at Christmas time. Pray that you would get a copy of Bill's book, There Really Is a Santa Claus. If you are encouraged or inspired by today's episode, we pray that you would pass it along to a family member or a friend to understand the true meaning of the Christmas season. This episode, as all of our episodes on the City of God, are produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and the Institute for Faith and Culture. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the City of God. The City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. Visit us at cityofgodpodcast.com to access all of our previous episodes. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or anywhere you get podcasts. A full video version of this podcast is available on YouTube. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.